Snow was falling heavily over the streets of Manhattan on that frigid December night in 2003. Richard Sterling adjusted the collar of his Italian wool coat and checked his watch. 7 p.m. His secretary, Jennifer, had tried to convince him to go home early. "Mr. Sterling, it's Christmas Eve. Even the sharks on Wall Street take a break today," she had said, straightening the papers on his desk. "Business doesn't stop for a holiday, Jennifer. You should know that by now," Richard replied in the cool, cutting voice that had become his trademark. "Yes, sir. But maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe what?" "Maybe you could, I don't know, visit some friends? Family?" Richard looked at her with an expression that made Jennifer instantly regret the suggestion. "You're paid to manage my schedule, not my personal life. You can go home." Now, walking alone down Fifth Avenue, Richard remembered that conversation. At 45, he was considered one of the richest men in New York, with a fortune of more than $800 million. His real estate empire dominated the city's skyline, but that night he felt emptier than any homeless person on the streets. His phone rang. It was James, his driver. "Mr. Sterling, do you need me to come pick you up?" "No, James, I'll walk. But sir, it's snowing hard and I said I'll walk. Go home and be with your family." Richard hung up abruptly. James had 3 small children and a wife who adored him. He always talked about them with a sparkle in his eyes that Richard had never fully understood. He kept walking and stopped in front of the Saks Fifth Avenue window display, where a family was taking pictures. The father held an old-fashioned camera while the mother arranged their 2 small children. "Smile! It's Christmas!" the father called out excitedly. "Daddy, I'm cold," the younger boy complained. "Just one more photo, champ. Mom wants to send it to Grandma." The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 5, bounced from one foot to the other. "When we get home, are we going to open the presents?" "Tomorrow morning, Princess. First we have to leave milk and cookies for Santa," the mother replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. Richard watched the scene with a strange feeling in his chest. A hot chocolate vendor approached. "Hot chocolate, sir. Cold night to be out here alone." "No, thank you." "You sure? It's on the house. Christmas Eve, you know. Nobody should be alone tonight." Richard looked at the man. He must have been around 60, his face weathered by time but his smile genuine. "Why are you working today instead of being with your family?" "Oh, my family's right here with me, sir." The man pointed to a woman helping a young woman pour chocolate into paper cups. "My wife, Maria, and my daughter, Rosa. We've worked together for 15 years. It's not the most glamorous job, but it put food on the table and sent Rosa to college." "And you're happy?" The man laughed. "Happy, sir, when you have people you love and who love you back. Even selling hot chocolate in the snow turns into a celebration. Money matters, sure, but it isn't everything in life." Richard pulled a $100 bill from his pocket. "Keep the change." "Sir, that's too much. I can't accept that." "Yes, you can. Merry Christmas." As he walked away, he heard the man shouting to his wife, "Maria, you won't believe what just happened." Richard kept walking, the conversation echoing in his mind. His phone rang again. It was Mrs. Patterson, his housekeeper. "Mr. Sterling, dinner is ready. Are you coming home?" "I'm not hungry." "Sir, you need to eat something. I made your favorite, that salmon with—" "Mrs. E. Patterson." "Yes, sir." "Why did you never marry? Never have children?" There was a silence on the other end. "Well, sir, I had a fiancé many years ago, but he died in the Vietnam War. After that, I never found anyone. Who Do you regret it? Sometimes, sir, especially on nights like this. But taking care of you all these years, in a way, it's been like having family. Richard felt his throat tighten. Go home, Mrs. Patterson. Spend Christmas with your sister in Boston. But sir, what about your dinner? I'll manage. Go. He hung up and stopped in front of Rockefeller Center. A family father, mother, and 2 children was trying to build a snowman on the sidewalk. Daddy, his eyes are crooked, the girl shouted, laughing. That's okay, princess. Crooked snowmen have more personality, the father said, lifting her onto his shoulders. Can I put the carrot on his nose? Of course you can. The child's bright laughter rang down the street. Richard watched the scene, feeling something stir in his chest, a longing for something he had never had. He kept walking toward his empty apartment, unaware that in just a few minutes he would come across something that would change his life forever. Richard turned onto East 78th Street, already feeling the relief of being close to home, when he heard a sound that made him stop cold. It was crying, faint, muffled, but unmistakably human. He looked around, confused. Must be a cat, he muttered to himself, but the sound persisted. He walked a few more yards and the crying grew clearer. It was coming from a narrow alley between 2 buildings where the block's trash dumpsters sat. Richard hesitated. In 45 years of life, he had never gotten involved in sketchy situations on the streets of New York. His rule was simple. Other people's problems weren't his problem. But something about that crying disturbed him deeply. Hello? Anyone there? He shouted, feeling ridiculous talking to himself in a dark alley. The crying stopped for a moment, then started up again, weaker. Richard pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. He walked carefully between the dumpsters, his heart beating faster than usual. The beam lit up trash cans, scattered plastic bags, and something that made him catch his breath. On the ground beside a blue dumpster sat a cardboard box, and inside that box, wrapped in dirty rags and shivering from the cold, was a baby. My God, Richard whispered, his voice breaking. The baby couldn't have been more than a few days old. His skin had a bluish tint from the cold, his lips nearly purple. A hospital bracelet was still fastened around his tiny wrist. Baby boy, 12/22/2003. Richard froze, staring at that defenseless little being. His rational mind screamed at him to call the police, social services, anyone who knew how to handle a situation like this. But his feet refused to move. Hey, what are you doing there? Richard spun around, startled. A homeless man was approaching, carrying a bag full of cans. I found a child. The man stepped closer, looked into the box and shook his head sadly. Happens more than you'd think around here. Young girls, no money, no family. You call anyone yet? No, you should. That baby won't last long, in this cold. Richard looked back at the baby. The tiny eyes were closed, but he was still breathing. Short, labored breaths that puffed little clouds of vapor into the freezing air. What's your name? He asked the homeless man. Tommy Johnson. I've been living on these streets about 8 years. Tommy, do you know a hospital nearby? Mount Sinai's about 10 blocks. But listen, man, if you try to carry that baby all the way in this snow. Richard didn't let Tommy finish. He took off his expensive coat and carefully wrapped the baby, lifting him from the box. The child was so light he was afraid he might be holding him wrong. Watch the head, Tommy advised. Babies are fragile. Do you have kids? I had a daughter. We lost touch a long time ago. Tommy looked at the baby in Richard's arms. That little guy's lucky. You seem like a good man. Richard left the alley with the baby, Tommy walking beside him. The contrast was absurd. A multi-millionaire in a $3,000 suit and a homeless man trudging together through Manhattan's snowy streets. "Why didn't you just call 911? Tommy asked as they walked. "I don't know. I've never been in a situation like this." "First time saving a life?" Richard stopped. "Saving a life. That's what you're doing, man. That baby would have died of hypothermia in another hour." On the way to the hospital, the baby opened his eyes a few times. They were dark, almost black, and seemed to look straight at Richard. Each time it happened, something strange stirred in the businessman's chest. "He's looking at me," Richard murmured. "Babies do that. It's instinct. They look for protection, for someone to take care of them. And if no one does," Tommy stopped and looked at Richard seriously, "then they die. Simple as that. The world isn't kind to the unprotected." They reached Mount Sinai Hospital. The ER was busy, even on Christmas Eve. Richard headed to the front desk, still holding the baby. "I need help. I found this abandoned baby." The nurse, a black woman in her 50s named Sarah Williams, according to her badge, immediately stood up. "My God. Get a gurney. Doctor. Rodriguez. Pediatrics. Stat." Within seconds, Richard was surrounded by a medical team. They tried to take the baby from his arms, but he hesitated. "Sir, we need to examine him now," Nurse Sarah said gently. "Is he going to be okay?" "We'll do everything we can. You did the right thing bringing him here." Reluctantly, Richard handed the baby over. He watched as the medical team hurried the child down the hospital corridor. "Sir?" Nurse Sarah returned a few minutes later. "We need some information. Are you the father?" "No, I found him in an alley near 78th Street. "I see. Would you like to stay with him, since you were the one who found him?" Richard looked down the hallway where they had taken the baby. "May I?" "Of course, but it's going to take a few hours." Richard sat in the uncomfortable chair in the waiting room, not fully understanding why he couldn't bring himself to leave. At some point, Tommy had disappeared, and now he was alone, waiting for news about a child he didn't even know. But as he waited, a strange certainty grew in his chest. His life had changed in that dark alley, and nothing would ever be the same again. Richard stayed in the waiting room for 4 hours. During that time, he watched families coming and going into nurses hurrying through the corridors, and the constant motion of a hospital that never slept. By the time the dead of night had given way to the first hours of Christmas morning, Nurse Sarah finally returned. "Mr." She looked at him, waiting for a name. "Sterling. Richard Sterling." "Mr. Sterling, the baby is stable. Mild hypothermia, malnutrition, but nothing we can't treat. He was very lucky." "Can I see him?" Sarah hesitated. "Sir, I need to be honest. Because the baby was abandoned, we've already notified social services. They'll take custody as soon as he's discharged, and then he'll enter the adoption system. Newborns are usually adopted quickly, so—" "And if no one adopts him?" Sarah sighed. "Mr. Sterling, you seem like a good person, but this baby will receive proper care. The system works." Richard followed her to the NICU. Through the glass, he saw the baby in an incubator, hooked up to several monitors. Even with all the medical equipment around him, the child looked strangely at peace. "How do you identify him here in the hospital?" Richard asked. "For now, he's just baby Sterling in our records, since you were the one who brought him in. It's standard protocol until social services take over officially. The adoptive parents will choose a permanent name." Richard felt Something odd hearing the name Sterling attached to that helpless child. Baby Sterling. It's only temporary, of course, Sarah quickly clarified. Richard watched the baby for a long time. Can I go in? Just for a few minutes. Inside the NICU, Richard stepped up to the incubator. The baby was awake, his dark eyes following every movement. Without thinking, Richard placed his hand on the glass. Hey there, little one, he whispered. You gave me a scare in the middle of the night. To his surprise, the baby moved his tiny hand toward the sound of his voice. Mr. Sterling? A voice behind him interrupted. It was a woman in her 40s wearing a formal blazer. I'm Linda Matthews, from Social Services. I need to ask you a few questions. They left the NICU and sat in a private room. Linda opened a folder and took out a pen. Can you tell me exactly how you found the child? Richard recounted the events of the previous night. Linda took meticulous notes. And you didn't see anyone suspicious in the area? Any young woman? No, just Tommy. Tommy? A homeless man who helped me. I don't know his last name. Linda continued with questions for another 20 minutes. In the end, she put the papers away and looked directly at Richard. Mr. Sterling, thank you for saving this child. Now we have to follow protocol. The baby will remain in state custody until we find a suitable family. Define suitable family. Well, young couples, preferably married, financially stable, clean records, who pass our psychological evaluation and if I wanted to adopt him. The question was out of Richard's mouth before he even realized he was going to say it. Linda blinked, surprised. You? Well, you're single, correct? Yes. And how many hours a day do you work? About 12, 14 hours. Linda shook her head. Mr. Sterling, adoption is very serious. A child needs time, attention, emotional stability. Do you have experience with children? No, but do you have family support? Someone to help? I have a housekeeper. Staff? Staff isn't family, Mr. Sterling. And forgive my frankness, but from what I can see, you're a very busy businessman. A baby isn't a corporate project. Irritation rose in Richard. And who guarantees that the suitable families in your system will give him more love than I would? Mr. Sterling? No. Listen, I found that baby abandoned on a freezing night. I saved him. I brought him here. Doesn't that count for anything? Linda sighed. It does, of course. But adoption isn't about gratitude or an emotional impulse. It's about what's best for the child. And you think it wouldn't be better for him to have a life without financial limitations? Education at the best schools? Opportunities most people can't even dream of. Money isn't everything, Mr. Sterling. Easy to say when you have money. Linda closed the folder. Mr. Sterling, if you truly want to adopt, there's a process. It can take months, even years. Psychological evaluations, home visits, training classes. And in the end, you might not be approved. Why not? Because infant adoptions generally prioritize young couples. You're 45. Single C, a self-admitted workaholic. That's not exactly the profile we prioritize. Richard stood abruptly. So what you're telling me is I should have left him to die in the alley? No, of course not. What you did was heroic. But I'm not good enough to raise him. Linda paused, choosing her words. Mr. Sterling, I'll be direct. Our system is overwhelmed. We have hundreds of children waiting for families. This baby, because he's a healthy newborn. I will find a family quickly. A traditional family, with the time and emotional structure to raise him properly. And if I want to try anyway? As I said, there's a process. But I need to warn you, the odds are slim. And the process is invasive. They'll look into every aspect of your life. Richard looked out the room's window. Outside, the Christmas morning sun shone on the clean snow, and the streets were starting to fill with families heading to their celebrations. I want to try. Linda studied him for a long moment. Are you sure? This will completely change your life. My life already changed, the moment I found him. All right, I'll give you the initial forms. But Mr. Sterling... Yes. Don't get too attached. The system rarely favors someone in your situation. Richard took the forms Linda handed him. When can I see him again? During the evaluation period, supervised. Visits may be allowed, but only if you officially start the process. Richard glanced once more toward the NICU. How will I know if he's okay? You can call the hospital. He'll likely be discharged in a few days. And, after that, he'll go to a temporary family until the final adoption. Richard tightened his grip on the paperwork. For the first time in his life, he had something to lose that he couldn't control with money or influence, and that terrified him. Richard went home on Christmas morning carrying the forms as if they were ultra-confidential corporate documents. His Upper East Side penthouse had never felt so empty and quiet. Mrs. Patterson had taken his suggestion and traveled to Boston, leaving only a note wishing him a Merry Christmas and letting him know she'd left a turkey in the oven in case he changed his mind about dining alone. He sat at his home office desk and spread the papers out in front of him. The first form was intimidating. Initial application for adoption, State of New York. Pages and pages of questions about his personal life, family history, and mental health, financial situation, and motivations for adopting. His phone rang. It was Jennifer, his secretary. Mr. Sterling, sorry to bother you on the holiday, but Mr. Morrison called 3 times about the Brooklyn Heights contract. Jennifer, what time is it? Noon, sir. Why? It's Christmas. Why are you working? There was a pause. Well, you always work on holidays. So I thought, go home, be with your family. Sir, are you all right? Richard looked at the forms in front of him. Jennifer, do you have kids? I have 2 girls, sir, 8 and 10. And, is it hard, being a mother? Jennifer laughed softly. It's the hardest and most rewarding thing in the world, Mr. Sterling. Why? Just curious. Go enjoy Christmas with them. He hung up and went back to the forms. The first question already left him paralyzed. Describe your motivations for adopting a child. How could he explain that finding that baby had awakened something in him he hadn't known existed? How could he put on paper that, for the first time in 45 years, he felt his life had a purpose beyond accumulating money? His phone rang again, an unknown number. Hello? Mr. Sterling, this is Dr. Rodriguez from Mount Sinai. You left your number for updates on the baby. Richard straightened in his chair. How is he? Responding well to treatment. Body temperature is normal and he's feeding properly. He's a strong little guy. Can I visit him? Well, visits are limited. But since you were the one who brought him in, I believe we can arrange something. I do need to let you know social services officially took custody an hour ago. Already? Yes. A foster family will pick him up as soon as he's discharged. Probably tomorrow. Richard felt his chest tighten. What kind of family? I can't share details, Mr. Sterling, but they're experienced people who've cared for other babies in similar situations. After hanging up, Richard looked at the forms again. The second question was even harder. Describe your prior experience with children. None. Absolutely none. He decided to call the only lawyer he knew outside the corporate world, Michael O'Brien, a family law specialist who'd represented some of his executives in divorce cases. Michael? Richard Sterling? Richard. Merry Christmas, man. I wasn't expecting your call today. I need help with something different. Adoption. There was a pause. You want to adopt? Richard? That's unexpected. It's a long story. Can you meet me today? Man, it's Christmas. I'm with my family in Long Island, but it must be important if you're calling. Today, can you come here? An hour later, Richard was at Michael's suburban home in Huntington, a colonial set amid snow-covered gardens. Children ran through the house, laughter echoing from room to room, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air. Richard, these are my kids, Tommy, Sarah, and little Jake, Michael said, as a girl of about 6 clung to his leg. Daddy, who's the fancy man? Sarah asked, eyeing Richard's immaculate suit. A friend of Daddy's, Princess. Go play. We need to talk. In Michael's makeshift office, Richard told the whole story. Michael listened closely, asking questions now and then. Richard, I'll be blunt. Your chances are close to 0. Why? You're a single and middle-aged man, no experience with kids, a self-confessed workaholic. The system prioritizes young couples, traditional families. But I have unlimited resources. I can give this child everything. Money isn't everything, Richard. Evaluators will want to know if you can give love, time, emotional attention. What if I changed, cut back my hours? Michael laughed. Richard, you've worked 70 hours a week for 20 years. You think you can change overnight? For him, yes. For him. Richard, you've known this. Baby less than 24 hours. So what? Michael leaned forward. Listen, I can help with the paperwork, but you need to understand. This process will expose every aspect of your life. They'll dig into your finances, your mental health, your relationships. They'll question every decision you've ever made. I have nothing to hide. You sure? What about those allegations of unethical practices in the Queen's land deal? The case was dropped, but it's still on your record. Richard had completely forgotten that episode. It was resolved. There was no crime. For the courts, maybe. For social services, it could be different. Just then, Michael's daughter ran into the office. Daddy, Mom says you have to come carve the turkey. Michael looked at Richard. Want to stay for dinner? Catherine cooked enough for an army. Richard looked through the window at Michael's family gathering in the dining room. The kids chattered excitedly. Michael's wife laughed at something the eldest had said, and there was an atmosphere of warmth and belonging he'd never experienced. No, thanks. I need to get back and fill out these forms. Richard? Yes? Are you sure you're doing this for the right reasons? Richard picked up the papers and stood. I've never been so sure of anything in my life. But as he drove back to Manhattan, a doubt grew in his chest. What if Michael was right? What if he really wasn't fit to be a father? What if his decision to adopt was just an emotional impulse that would put that child's future at risk? For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling doubted himself. The next 3 days were the longest of Richard's life. He had meticulously filled out every form, retained Michael as his attorney, and officially initiated the adoption process. But every passing hour was one more hour the baby was away from him, with a foster family he didn't know. On Wednesday morning, his phone rang. It was Linda Matthews. Mr. Sterling, I need to see you today. Something happened. Richard nearly dropped his coffee cup. Is he okay? Is the baby okay? He's fine. But we need to talk. Can you come to my office at 2 this afternoon? The social services office was in a rundown building in Lower Manhattan. Richard arrived 15 minutes early, more nervous than he'd ever been for any business meeting. Linda greeted him with a different expression, less hostile, more thoughtful. "Mr. Sterling, please have a seat." "What happened?" Linda opened a folder on her desk. "We received information about the baby's mother." Richard leaned forward. "Did she show up?" "No, she died." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "How?" "Overdose. She was found in an abandoned apartment. In the Bronx. She was only 17. Linda paused. "Her name was Maria Santos, an undocumented immigrant, addicted to heroin. According to the medical records we obtained, she gave birth alone and then abandoned the baby. My God, there's more. We managed to trace some of her relatives. An aunt in El Salvador who didn't even know Maria was pregnant. She's neither able nor willing to care for the baby." Richard absorbed the information in silence. So he's completely alone. "Technically, yes. No known relatives able to assume custody." Linda watched him carefully. "Mr. Sterling, this changes a few things in your case." "How so?" "Infants without family are prioritized differently in the system. And, well, we received a few calls about you." Richard frowned. "What kind of calls?" Linda checked her notes. "From Dr. Rodriguez, who said you call every day to ask how the baby is doing. From Nurse Sarah, who mentioned how you behaved at the hospital. And, this was a surprise, from Tommy Johnson." "Tommy, the homeless man. He came to us. Said he wanted to give a statement about how you saved the baby." Linda smiled for the first time. He was very eloquent, actually. Richard was stunned. "He really did that." "He did. Said that in 30 years living on the streets, he's never seen anyone act with such compassion." Linda closed the folder. "Mr. Sterling, I still have reservations about your ability to be a father. But these people see something in you that maybe you don't even see in yourself." "What does that mean for my case?" "It means I'm going to expedite your evaluation. The first home visit will be tomorrow." Richard left the office with a mixture of hope and fear. When he got home, he called Mrs. Patterson immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to come back from Boston today." "Sir, did something happen?" "Social Services is doing a home inspection tomorrow, about the adoption." There was a pause. "Adoption?" "Sir, what?" "It's a long story. Can you come back?" "Of course, sir, but—" "May I ask, are you going to adopt a child?" "A baby. I found him abandoned on Christmas Eve." Mrs. Patterson was silent for a long moment. "My God, sir, how many years have I worked for you?" 15. "And I've never seen you show interest in, well, in family." "I know it sounds crazy, Mrs. Patterson." "No, sir. It sounds human." That afternoon, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He left the office early. His partner, David Morrison, was shocked. "Richard, the meeting with the Japanese is at 6. Reschedule." "Reschedule?" "Richard, we're talking about 400 million. Richard stopped at the door. "David, there are things more important than money." "Since when?" "Since I found one." The next morning, Richard woke at 5 to get the apartment ready. Mrs. Patterson had returned during the night and worked tirelessly to make everything spotless. "Sir, may I say something?" she asked as she arranged fresh flowers in the living room. "Of course. In all these years I've never seen you so alive. It's as if you found a purpose." At exactly 10 o'clock, Linda Matthews arrived with a child psychologist, Dr. Helen Carter. They inspected every room and asked questions about routine, safety, and future plans. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Carter said, "how do you intend to balance your career with the demands of a baby?" "I'll reduce my workload. Hire a qualified nanny. Mrs. Patterson has already offered to help. And if the baby gets sick during an important meeting, the meeting can wait. He can't." Linda and Dr. Carter exchanged glances. "Mr. Sterling," the psychologist continued, "why do you want to adopt this particular baby?" Richard paused, searching for the right words. "Because when I found him in that alley, I felt something I'd never felt before. As if I were looking at my son. But you don't have experience with children." "No, but I have love, and the will to learn, and the resources to give him everything he needs. Money isn't everything, Mr. Sterling." "I know. That's why I'm changing my life." After 2 hours, the two women were getting ready to leave when Linda turned back. "Mr. Sterling, there's a possibility of a supervised visit later this week, if you're interested." Richard's heart sped up. "When?" "Friday. At the foster family's home. I'll be there." After they left, Richard sat in his armchair and looked out the window toward Central Park. For the first time in weeks, he felt something like hope. Friday arrived with a fine drizzle that turned the streets of Queens into a gray mirror. Richard had changed his clothes 3 times, as nervous as a teenager on a first date. He finally settled on a navy sweater and jeans, the most casual outfit he owned. Mrs. Patterson watched from the bedroom doorway. "Sir, you're shaking." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. Come here." She straightened his sweater collar with a motherly touch. "You'll do well. You'll see it comes naturally." The foster family's house was on a quiet street in Astoria. It was a modest 2-story place with a small front yard where scattered toys signaled the presence of children. Richard parked and sat for a few minutes in the car, taking deep breaths. Linda Matthews was waiting at the door. "Mr. Sterling," punctual as always, "this is the Williamses' home, Carol and Robert. They've been caring for infants in transition for 15 years. A black woman in her 50s opened the door, smiling warmly. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Carol Williams. I've heard a lot about you." "I hope it was good," Richard replied, trying to relax. "All good, I assure you. Come in. He's in the living room." Richard stepped into the simple but cozy home. Family photos lined the walls. Toys were neatly stored in baskets, and the air held a hint of cinnamon. But all of that faded when he saw the baby. He was in an infant seat, wearing a light blue onesie. He had visibly grown in the last few days, and his skin had a healthy rosy tone. The baby was awake, taking in the room with dark, watchful eyes. "My God," Richard murmured. "He looks so much better." Carol smiled. "Babies bounce back fast with proper care. He's been an angel. Eats well, sleeps through the night." Richard approached slowly and knelt beside the seat. "Hey there, little guy. How are you?" The baby looked at Richard with the natural curiosity of a child that age, moving his tiny arms slowly. "May I hold him?" Richard asked Linda. "Of course. That's what we're here for." Carefully, Richard lifted the baby. He'd read a few books on infant care over the past days, but in practice his hands trembled slightly. The baby was heavier than he remembered, and much warmer. "Watch his head," Carol coached gently. "There you go, just like that." Richard settled the baby against his chest. The feeling was strange and familiar at the same time, as if something inside him already knew exactly what to do. "Hi, buddy," he whispered, voice catching. You're doing so much better. Robert Williams came into the room, a big, kind man who worked as a firefighter. This must be the famous Richard Sterling, he said, extending a hand. I'm Robert. My wife hasn't stopped talking about the miracle baby someone found on Christmas Eve. Is he adjusting well here? Richard asked. Perfectly. He's an easygoing baby, no trouble. Robert paused. But may I ask a personal question? Sure. Why did you decide to adopt? I mean, it's not a decision you make overnight. Richard looked down at the baby in his arms. It wasn't planned. When I found him, something changed in me. It's hard to explain. Carol nodded understandingly. We've seen that before. Sometimes God puts us in the right place at the right time. Do you believe in destiny? Richard asked. I believe some things happen for a reason, Carol replied. A baby abandoned on one of the coldest nights of the year, found by someone willing to save him, doesn't feel like a coincidence to me. During the visit, Richard tried to do everything a father would do. He gave a bottle with Carol's help, attempted a diaper change with lots of guidance, and simply watched the baby. Every expression, every tiny movement fascinated him in a way he couldn't explain. Mr. Sterling, Linda said while he was rocking the baby, how does it feel to be a father? I'm not a father officially yet. But how does it feel? Richard paused, searching for the right words. Terrified, excited, like I finally found something I didn't know I was looking for. And work. How do you plan to balance it? I've already started delegating more. I hired 2 new directors last week. Carol studied Richard closely. May I offer an opinion? In 15 years of doing this, I've learned to tell who truly wants to be a parent and who's trying to fill a void. You have a natural touch. I don't feel natural. I feel clumsy. All parents feel that way at first, Robert said. I nearly fainted the first time I held my oldest. How many children do you have? Richard asked. 3 biological, all grown. And we've cared for more than 60 babies over the years, Carol answered proudly. And what happens to them? Most find wonderful families. Some become special to us. Carol looked at the baby. This one. There's something different about him. What do you mean? It's just a feeling. He seems to be waiting for something, or someone. Linda checked the time. Mr. Sterling, we need to wrap up for today. When it was time to go, Richard struggled to hand the baby back to Carol, not because the baby protested, but because he himself didn't want to let go. When can I see him again? He asked. That depends on how the next steps in the process go, Linda replied. Outside, Linda walked with Richard to his car. Mr. Sterling, may I give you some unofficial advice? Please. You're on the right track. But remember, there are many couples interested in this baby. Some have been trying to adopt for years. And what does that mean for my chances? It means you need to show you can be the best father for him, not just a good one. How do I do that? Keep being honest about your motivations. Keep showing you're willing to change. And Richard, keep being yourself. The man who saved a baby on a cold night is the same man who can raise him. On the drive back to Manhattan, Richard called Mrs. Patterson. How did it go, sir? Mrs. Patterson, I finally understand why people have children. And why is that? Richard thought for a moment. Because suddenly your life makes sense in a way it never did before. Then you're already a father, no matter what the paperwork says. That night, Richard couldn't focus on work. He stood by the window, imagining what it would be like to have a crib in his bedroom. What it would be like to wake up in the middle of the night to care for someone other than himself. For the first time in his life, the future mattered more than the present. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of Richard's life. He had completely reorganized his routine, delegating important meetings and turning down business trips he once would have considered essential. His office, which used to be his sanctuary, now felt like a prison that kept him away from what really mattered. "Jennifer, cancel the meeting with the German group," he said on a Monday, sliding the papers into his folder. "Mr. Sterling, that meeting has been scheduled for 3 months. It's $200 million in investments. Reschedule it for next week." Jennifer looked at him, worried. "Sir, may I ask what's going on? These past few weeks you've been different." Richard stopped and looked at his secretary. Jennifer had worked with him for 8 years and had never questioned his decisions. "I'm trying to adopt a baby." "You... what?" Jennifer nearly spilled her coffee. "Adopt? It's a long story, but it means I need to be available for social services visits, interviews, medical appointments." "My God, Mr. Sterling, that's wonderful." Jennifer smiled genuinely. "How old is he?" "A few weeks. He's a baby I found abandoned on Christmas Eve." "And where is he now?" "With a foster family. I can visit him twice a week." Jennifer sat down, still processing the information. "Mr. Sterling, in 8 years working with you, I've never seen you so human." "Thank you, I think. It's a compliment. You've always been fair with me, but distant. Now, it seems like you've found something that truly makes you happy." That afternoon, Richard had his second visit with the baby. This time he arrived carrying a bag full of books on child development and a musical mobile he'd bought. At FAO Schwartz, Carol opened the door with a smile. "Mr. Sterling, you're right on time. He just woke up from his nap." "How is he?" "Growing fast. And look what you brought." Carol took the mobile from the bag. "It's beautiful, but it wasn't necessary. I wanted to bring him something." In the living room, the baby was on a colorful playmat, moving his arms and legs energetically. Richard sat on the floor beside him. "Hey there, little one. How are you today?" The baby turned his head toward Richard's voice, focusing on him with the kind of attention babies that age often have. "He's more alert," Richard observed. "Babies develop quickly in the first weeks," Carol explained. "Every day brings changes." Richard extended a finger, and the baby immediately tried to grab it with his tiny hand. The strength of the grip surprised Richard. "He's strong. And smart. Watch this." Carol shook a colorful rattle. The baby followed the movement with keen eyes. During the 2-hour visit, Richard tried to learn everything he could: how to bathe him, how to change diapers efficiently, how to interpret different kinds of crying. "Mr. Sterling," Carol said while he fed the baby a bottle, "may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. What has changed in your life since you decided to adopt?" Richard thought for a moment. "Everything. I wake up thinking about him. I go to sleep thinking about him. My decisions at work are based on how they'll affect my availability to be a father." "And you don't regret it?" "Not for a second." Robert came home from work in the middle of the visit, still wearing his firefighter uniform. "Richard, how's it going, man?" "Hey, Robert, all good? Carol told me you brought a mobile. That's thoughtful." Robert sat in an armchair. "Can I give you some advice from a seasoned dad? Please. Stop trying to be perfect. You're working so hard to do everything right that you're missing the most important thing, which is just enjoying being with him. Babies don't need perfect parents. They need present ones." Linda Matthews arrived at the end of the visit to observe the interaction. She watched Richard in silence for several minutes. "Mr. Sterling, how do you feel about the next step in the process?" Nervous? And what is the next step? A comprehensive psychological interview next week. It'll be long and detailed. About what? Your childhood, past relationships, motivations for adopting, plans for the child's future. Richard nodded. I'm ready. And there's something else. 2 couples on the waiting list have asked to meet this specific baby. Richard's stomach flipped. When? Next week as well. And after that? After that, the adoption committee makes a decision. When it was time to leave, Richard gently kissed the baby's forehead. Bye, little one. Daddy will be back soon. In the car, he called Mrs. Patterson. How did it go, sir? It's getting harder and harder to leave. And how are you feeling about this whole process? Richard drove in silence for a few minutes. Mrs. Patterson, do you think I can be a good father? Sir, you've taken care of me for 15 years. You've never let me want for anything. You've always been respectful, and you remember my birthday every year. If you can look after an employee like that, imagine a son. But taking care of you is different. You're an independent adult. And you learned how to be a boss too, didn't you? No one is born knowing how to be an executive. Why would fatherhood be any different? That night, Richard canceled a business dinner and stayed home reading about child development. He'd bought 12 books on fatherhood and was devouring every page. His phone rang. It was Michael O'Brien. Richard, how are things going? Complicated. There are other couples interested. That was to be expected. Healthy. Babies are in high demand. Michael, be honest with me. What are my real chances? Michael sighed. Richard, you've changed a lot in the last few weeks. That's obvious to anyone who knows you. But the system still sees you as a single, middle-aged businessman. And that disqualifies me? Not necessarily. But it means you have to be extraordinary, not just adequate. How do I do that? Keep being yourself. The man who saved a baby on a cold night. The man who's willing to change his entire life for someone he met a month ago. After hanging up, Richard sat in his empty, quiet living room. For the first time, he truly understood what was at stake. It wasn't just about adopting a child. It was about becoming the person he was always meant to be. The psychological interview was scheduled for a Thursday at 9 in the morning. Richard arrived at Dr. Helen Carter's office 15 minutes early, wearing the same navy sweater he'd worn to his first visit with the baby. It had become a kind of good luck charm. The office was welcoming, with pastel walls and a bookshelf full of titles on child psychology. Dr. Carter greeted him with a professional smile. Mr. Sterling, thank you for coming. This interview can last up to 3 hours, depending on how our conversation flows. I'm ready. Great. Let's start by talking about your childhood. For 2 hours, Richard answered questions about his family, his parents, his relationships. He spoke about the loneliness he had always felt, about how work had become his only source of identity. Mr. Sterling, you've never married. Why? Richard paused. I always thought I didn't have time for serious relationships, that they were a distraction. And now I realize I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of disappointing someone, of not being enough. Richard looked out the window. My parents died when I was young. After that, I convinced myself it was safer not to get attached to anyone. And what changed? When I found that baby, it was like something asleep inside me woke up. For the first time in my life, I felt I had a purpose bigger than making money. Dr. Carter took notes. Richard, may I call you that? Are you aware that raising a child will radically change your life? It's already changing. How so? Richard told her about the changes he'd made at work, how he was learning about infant care, how his priorities had completely rearranged. And if the adoption isn't approved, how would you handle that rejection? The question hit Richard like a punch. He had avoided thinking about that possibility. It would be devastating, he admitted. But it wouldn't change the fact that that baby taught me to be a better person. 2 weeks later, Richard faced his biggest challenge yet. Linda Matthews called him in for an urgent meeting. "Mr. Sterling, I need to be direct. A problem has come up." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "What kind of problem?" "One of the investigators found some irregularities in your past business dealings." "What irregularities?" "The Queen's property case 5 years ago. There were allegations of bribery, even though they were dropped." Richard vaguely remembered the case. It was resolved. There was no crime. "For the courts, yes. But for our committee, it raises questions about your ethical conduct." "Linda, is this serious?" "Very serious. The committee is considering suspending your case." Richard left the meeting crushed. He immediately called Michael O'Brien. "Michael, can they really disqualify me over something that happened 5 years ago?" "They can, Richard. Adoption is about character. Any blemish in your history can be used against you." "What can I do?" "We need to gather character. References. People who can vouch for your integrity." "Who?" "I don't have many close friends." "Think, Richard. Employees, clients, anyone who can speak to the man you really are." That night, Richard sat in his office and made a list. It was depressing to see how few people really knew him beyond business. He decided to start with Mrs. Patterson. "Mrs. Patterson, I need a favor. Social services want statements about my character." "Of course, sir. But may I say something?" "Yes. You're worrying about the past when you should focus on the present. The man who saved that baby isn't the same man who did questionable deals 5 years ago." The next morning, Richard did something he had never done. He personally visited some of his longest tenured employees. "Jennifer, I need your help." "Of course, Mr. Sterling, what can I do?" "Social services is questioning my character. Would you write a letter of recommendation?" Jennifer smiled. "Mr. Sterling, in 8 years here, I've never seen you treat anyone disrespectfully. You're demanding but fair. And in the last few weeks, you've become almost human." "Thank you, I think. It's a compliment. You're kinder, more present. Whatever that baby did to you, it was good." Richard also visited Tommy Johnson, who was still living on the streets near where they'd found the baby. "Tommy, remember me?" "Sure. The guy who saved the baby. How is he?" "Good. I'm trying to adopt him officially." "That's great, man. I always knew you were different. Actually, I need a favor. Would you give a statement about that night?" "Of course. You want to know what I'll say? That I saw a rich man drop his perfect life to save a child he didn't even know. If that's not character, I don't know what is." The most important letter came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rodriguez from Mount Sinai wrote a detailed statement about how Richard had behaved on that Christmas night. "In 30 years of medicine, I have rarely seen someone show such genuine compassion for an unknown child," the doctor wrote. But it was Carol Williams who wrote the most powerful words. "I've cared for babies for 15 years, and I've seen many adoptive parents. Some want babies for the wrong reasons, to fill voids, to save marriages, to satisfy family pressure. Richard Sterling wants to be a father because he discovered he has love to give. Any child would be lucky to have him as a father." A week later, Linda called. "Mr. Sterling, good news. The committee has decided not to suspend your case." "And the statements helped?" Very much. But there's a condition. What is it? You'll have a final interview next week, with the other candidates. What do you mean? All the finalist candidates will appear before the committee. It's rare, but it happens when the decision is difficult. How many candidates are left? 3, you, a young couple of doctors, and a couple who already have 2 adopted children. Richard hung up and looked out the window of his office. Outside, Manhattan buzzed with its usual energy, but he felt strangely calm. He had spent 2 months preparing for this moment, not as a businessman prepping a presentation, but as a man who had discovered who he really wanted to be. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling was fighting for something more important than money or power. He was fighting to become a father. The Department of Social Services conference room had never looked so intimidating. Richard arrived 20 minutes early, wearing his best suit, not out of vanity, but because he wanted to show respect for the importance of the moment. 5 people made up the evaluation committee: Linda Matthews, Dr. Helen Carter, a family court judge, a veteran social worker, and a child psychologist. They sat behind a long table with stacks of documents in front of them. Mr. Sterling, Linda said, the other candidates will arrive in a few minutes. Each will have 20 minutes to present and answer questions. Richard nodded, trying to steady his nerves. He looked around the room and saw empty chairs that would soon be occupied by people who wanted the same thing he did, a chance to raise that baby. The first to arrive were Doctors James and Sarah Mitchell, both in their 30s. She was a pediatrician, he a cardiologist. They greeted Richard politely before taking their seats. "Do you have children?" Richard asked, trying to make conversation. "Not yet," Sarah replied. "We've been trying for 3 years. We decided adoption is the right path for us." "We've always wanted a big family," James added. "We have a lot of love to give." Next came Mark and Lisa Thompson, a couple in their 40s. Mark was an elementary school teacher. Lisa worked part-time as a nurse. "Do you already have children?" Richard asked. 2, Lisa answered proudly. "Emma is 8. Ian David is 6, both adopted as infants." "And why do you want a third?" James Mitchell asked. Mark smiled. "Because our kids keep asking for a little brother, and honestly, we love being parents." Richard listened and felt a tightening in his chest. How could he compete with young doctors or with experienced parents who had already raised adopted children successfully? "Let's begin," Linda announced. "Doctors Mitchell, please." Richard watched as the couple delivered an almost perfect presentation. They talked about financial stability, medical expertise, support networks. They had prepared answers for every question. "Why this baby specifically?" the judge asked. "Abandoned infants require special care," Sarah replied. "Our medical backgrounds allow us to offer not just love, but the best health care possible." "What would the child's daily routine be?" Dr. Carter asked. They answered, in detail about schedules, high-quality daycare, early cognitive stimulation, future extracurricular activities. Richard felt smaller by the minute. They had a perfect plan for everything. The Thompsons were called next. Their presentation was warmer, focused on practical parenting experience. "How did your children react to the idea of a new sibling?" Linda asked. "Emma said she's going to teach the baby to walk," Lisa laughed. "David wants to share all his toys. They're thrilled. And finances. 3 children come with significant costs," the psychologist noted. "We live simply," Mark replied. "We don't have a lot of money, but our kids have never gone without. Love has no price." When it was Richard's turn, his legs were trembling. He stood and walked to the front of the room. "Members of the committee," he began. "I'm not a doctor. I don't have prior experience with children. I don't have a ready-made family waiting at home." There were murmurs around the room. Richard continued. 3 months ago, I was a completely different man. I lived only for work, had no meaningful relationships, and didn't understand what it meant to love someone unconditionally. His voice grew steadier. On Christmas Eve, I found a baby abandoned in an alley. In that moment, something inside me changed forever. It wasn't pity. It wasn't impulse. It was recognition. Recognition of what? Dr. Carter asked. That child and I needed each other. He needed someone to love him, and I needed to learn how to love. Richard looked at each committee member. I know I seem like the least obvious choice. I can't offer siblings or a mother. I can't offer medical expertise or deep knowledge of child development, but I can offer something I've discovered I have in abundance: unconditional love. Mr. Sterling, the judge interrupted, how can we be sure this change is permanent, that it isn't just a phase? Richard took a deep breath. Because over the last 2 months, I've completely reorganized my life. I hired new directors to take on responsibilities I once considered indispensable. I reduced my workload by 60%. I turned one of my bedrooms into a nursery. And if the adoption isn't approved, Linda asked, then I'll still be a better man for having tried. That baby has already given me more than I could ever give him. He taught me to be human. What makes you different from the other candidates? The psychologist asked. Richard looked at the Mitchells and the Thompsons. Nothing. They're wonderful people who would be fantastic parents. But He paused, searching for the right words. I need him as much as he needs me. I'm not trying to complete a family or fulfill a dream. I'm trying to save myself, and maybe, in the process, give him the best version of a father I can be. The room fell completely silent. Any further questions? Linda asked. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, if you were approved today, what's the first thing you would do? Richard smiled for the first time in his presentation. I'd call Mrs. Patterson and say, get the nursery ready. Our son is coming home. Our son? Dr. Carter questioned. Mrs. Patterson has been my housekeeper for 15 years. She's the most maternal person I know, and she's already offered to help me care for him. I may not be able to give him a biological mother, but I can give him an adoptive grandmother who will love him unconditionally. The committee exchanged meaningful looks. Thank you very much, Mr. Sterling. You'll receive our decision in 48 hours. Richard left the room knowing he had given everything he had. For the first time in his life, the outcome didn't depend on his negotiating skills or his bank account. It depended on his heart. The longest 48 hours of Richard's life finally ended when his phone rang on a Friday at 3 in the afternoon. Mr. Sterling, this is Linda Matthews. Can you come to our office? Has the decision been made? Yes. You need to come in person. Richard dropped everything and ran to Lower Manhattan faster than he'd ever run to any meeting. He arrived breathless at Linda's office, where she greeted him with an unreadable expression. Mr. Sterling, please have a seat. Linda, please, just tell me. She opened a folder and looked him straight in the eyes. The committee has decided to approve your adoption. Richard felt as if the world had stopped. What? You made it, Richard. Congratulations. You're officially a father. Richard collapsed into the chair, tears streaming uncontrollably. I can't believe it. The vote was unanimous. Your honesty in the presentation, the character statements, and above all the genuine transformation we've observed these past months convinced everyone. An hour later, Richard was at the Williamses' home, officially holding his son in his arms. The baby, now 3 months old, had grown considerably and was looking at him with those same dark, attentive eyes. Hi, my son, Richard whispered. It's official now. You're mine, and I'm yours. Mrs. Patterson was waiting at the penthouse when Richard arrived carrying the baby. "Welcome home, young sir," she said, tears in her eyes. "Your room is ready." Richard looked at the baby in his arms. Nathan. Nathan Sterling. It means gift from God. 20 years later, Mount Sinai Hospital was in emergency mode. An explosion at a nearby school had brought in dozens of injured children, and every available doctor had been called in. Dr. Nathan Sterling, now a pediatric trauma specialist, was racing through the corridors, saving life after life. "Dr. Sterling," a nurse shouted. "A child just arrived in critical condition." Nathan entered the ER and his heart stopped. A little girl of about 5, unconscious with severe injuries. But what shocked him was the woman beside the gurney, a young woman around 25, clearly the mother, desperate. "Please, doctor, save my daughter. She's all I have in the world." Nathan worked for 3 straight hours. When the girl was finally stable, he stepped out of the room exhausted. The mother was waiting for him in the hall. "Doctor, is my daughter going to be okay?" "She is. She's a fighter." Nathan sat beside the woman. "What's her name?" "Maria. Maria Santos." Nathan felt a chill. "Santos?" "Yes. It's her father's last name. He died last year. I'm Isabella." "May I ask, do you have any family?" Isabella shook her head sadly. "No. My parents died when I was a teenager. It's just Maria and me now." Nathan thought for a moment. "Isabella, can I ask you a strange question? Have you ever heard of a Maria Santos who lived in New York about 20 years ago?" Isabella looked at him, surprised. "Maria Santos was my cousin, older than me. She died of an overdose a long time ago when I was still a kid." "Why?" Nathan's heart pounded. Did she have a child?" "She did. A baby who was abandoned and later adopted by a wealthy family. My grandmother always said she hoped he'd had a good life." Nathan felt tears welling. "Isabella, I'm that baby." Isabella was stunned. "What?" "I'm Nathan Sterling. My biological mother was Maria Santos, your cousin." They stared at each other in silence, absorbing the magnitude of that encounter. "So, you're my cousin?" Isabella whispered. "And Maria is my cousin too." Nathan smiled through tears. "Isabella, you're not alone in the world. You have family." That night, Nathan called Richard, who was now 65. "Dad, I have to tell you something incredible that happened today." "Tell me, son." Nathan recounted the whole encounter. Richard listened in silence. "Dad, do you know what this means? That God had bigger plans than we imagined." "Exactly. I saved Maria today, the daughter of my biological mother's cousin. I saved a child from the same family I came from. And now Isabella and Maria have a family. What are you going to do?" "I want them to come home. I want them to meet you. I want Maria to grow up knowing she has a cousin who's a doctor and an adoptive grandpa who loves her." Richard smiled on the other end of the line. "Your biological mother would be proud, Nathan. You weren't just saved. You're saving others now." A week later, Richard's penthouse was full again. But this time, it was Isabella teaching little Maria to walk on the living room rug while Mrs. Patterson made hot chocolate for everyone. "Grandpa Richard!" Maria shouted, running into Richard's arms. "Cousin Nathan said you're a hero." Richard looked at Nathan, who watched the scene with a huge smile. "Dad," Nathan said, "do you know what the most amazing part of all this is?" "What?" Maria was born exactly 20 years after you found me, on the same day. On Christmas Eve. Richard felt a shiver. That can't be a coincidence. It isn't. It's love multiplying. You saved me, I saved her, and now we all save each other. Isabella came over carrying an old photograph. Richard, I wanted to show you this. It belonged to my grandmother. It's a photo of the Santos family. In the picture, a young woman held a baby. This is Maria, Nathan's mother, when she was little. Richard looked at the photo and smiled. It looked identical to Nathan's baby pictures. Nathan, Richard said, moved. Your mother may have left early, but she left a whole family for you to find. And Dad. The most beautiful thing is that Maria will grow up knowing there's love in the world, that families find each other, that miracles happen on Christmas Eve. That night, while everyone slept, Richard stood on the balcony looking out over the city. 20 years earlier, he'd been a lonely man. Today, he was a grandfather to 2 children who weren't biologically his, but whom he loved as if they were his own life. Love, Richard discovered, really is the only thing that multiplies when it's shared. So, what an incredible story. If you were moved by this family finding one another in such a special way, drop a like. Tell us in the comments which part touched you the most, and subscribe for more stories that will warm your heart. Binge the other stories on the channel. Each one has a different lesson about love. Thanks for staying to the end.